movement and a good friend of West Suburban Patriots. C. Stephen Tucker has been an independent multi-state licensed insurance broker since 1995. He's gained a reputation as a health insurance industry expert. He hosts a weekly blog talk radio show answering consumer health insurance questions from around the country, and has also served as a health insurance subject matter expert for several business journals, including the Wall Street Journal and Fortune Small Business Magazine. Steve's going to bring us up to date on the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare. Please welcome Steve.
I'm going to have this on this morning because my 17-year-old daughter's car died at Lake Street in Springfield in Bloomingdale. So I got a tow truck, everything's okay, but if there's an emergency, I have to pick this up. Great to be back with the West Suburban Patriots. I must say this group has probably doubled in size since the last time I was here. That is so encouraging to see. I speak at Tea Party groups all over the Midwest, and very rarely do people meet at 9 a.m. and it's a packed audience. So that is some serious patriotism. And I wanted to touch on one thing about Joe Walsh. As you know, Thursday night he announced at our Chicago Tea Party meeting that he's running in the 8th District. He has 2 weeks to get a minimum of 600 signatures to run in the new 8th District. And it's a very good thing he's doing because we don't have to take out another Tea Party rep, which is what the Democrats wanted us to do. They cut the district, so either Randy or Joe would be out of a job. So Joe's taking the high road and running in a difficult district. 600 signatures is the minimum. The Democrats will weed through every one of those because Joe is their #1 target, so we probably need about 1,500 to 1,800 signatures, and we have 2 weeks to do that. So if you have time, please contact the Walsh for Congress.
Don't those signatures have to be in his district?
In the 8th District, yes. Yeah. So I will be helping today and tomorrow and as often as I can.
We have a map if you don't know what district you're in, because they redid it. So a lot of you are in the 8th District. You don't even know it. In fact, most people in this room are.
Are in the 8th District, yeah.
That's
I was in
right.
Roscom's district for years.
Right, and now we're not Roscom anymore.
Okay, back to the Patient Protection and Unaffordable Care Act. I call it Obamacare, and I've been called every name in the book for the last 2 years because everything that I've been warning Americans about, especially our seniors who are in great peril, has come true, unfortunately, and it's going to get much worse. But oftentimes, even before I start talking, the first thing I'll say is Obamacare. And the liberals will attack me and say, well, why do you call it Obamacare? And my answer, and your answer should always be, the president spent $1.5 million of our taxes to put the term Obamacare at the top of the Google and Yahoo search engines. So when you click on the word Obamacare to find out the truth about the legislation, it will click to the government's website promoting the legislation. So if the president spent $1.5 million of my taxes, I'm going to call it Obamacare. That should be your answer. It's very important that we understand how we got here and how we got this legislation, and then what we can do to stop it, and then if we don't, what's going to happen. I was in DC visiting Joe about 3 weeks ago, and I was at the Dirksen Federal Building, and I got an email alert on my phone, and it said, don't forget to watch David Rivkin at the Heritage Institute, Is Obamacare Constitutional, in Washington, D.C. I go, Washington, D.C., I wonder how close I am to the Heritage Institute. So I did my little GPS thing, 3/10 of a mile. So I walked over, sat in the front row, and met my hero, David Rivkin. If you don't know who David Rivkin is, he's the one who won the landmark decision in Florida, which not only did Judge Vinson knock down the individual mandate, but he ruled the entire legislation unconstitutional. On the panel, you can Google this when you get home, Is Obamacare Constitutional, from the Heritage Institute. You can see the entire 3-panel discussion. You'll hear me discussing with David Rivkin from the audience. And my question to him is a question I get everywhere I speak, and that is, where does Justice Kennedy stand? Because everybody thinks Justice Kennedy is going to be the swing vote. And I was very concerned about whether he's going to rule yay or nay. And I was encouraged, and you will be too when you hear Mr. Rivkin's response, that he has gone back and looked at all of Justice Kennedy's decisions in the past. And every one of them, when it comes down to a states' rights issue, he has voted for the protection and the sovereignty of the states. So he does not believe that he will rule against it come June, which will be when this case is decided. It's also unprecedented that the Supreme Court has allowed 5.5 hours to see 4 different parts of this legislation, not just the mandate. But there's a part that they were not asked to consider, and they're actually going to consider it, and that is the massive expansion of Medicaid, which will bankrupt the states. And the reason we're expanding Medicaid so greatly is because we now have to insure 18 to 24 million people. Now, normally you would think, well, that means they have to buy health insurance, right? So why are we expanding Medicaid? Because in the legislation, it has expanded what they call poverty from its current poverty levels to 140% above the federal poverty level today for an individual, and up to 400% for a family of 4. So if you run those numbers, that's $90,000 a year for a family of 4. You, the taxpayer, will be subsidizing up to half of their premium, which is why we are bankrupting the states. Illinois, unfortunately, is a blue state. They are not contributing in any of the pushback against this legislation. In fact, they're moving at breakneck speed to implement this legislation. And it angers me greatly, and I will tell you why. When I spoke here last, I was very encouraged because we had a massive group of Tea Party representatives who went to Congress. And if you remember around that time, when was it, Carol? November? December? Yeah. Right after our Tea Party reps got in. And at that time, and right before there, Michelle Bachmann and Congressman Steve King were beseeching the public and asking these new Tea Party reps, when you get here, help us stop Obamacare. Do whatever you can do to help us stop it. Because if you remember, Edith the Dingbat Pelosi, which is what I call her, she reminds me of Gene Stapleton's Edith the Dingbat. That's a pass the bill if I want to. She stuck $105 billion into the legislation in what they call automatic Obamacare funding, which means that that funding cannot be turned over by an act of Congress. It's the first time in American history that a piece of legislation has been shoved through on Christmas Eve using the Reconciliation Act. Because remember, we got Scott Brown in Massachusetts. I'm not so thrilled with him today. But at the time, he was a 41st vote. So they had to use the reconciliation process to shove it down our throats in the Senate on Christmas Eve. You know, it's been a couple of years, so we kind of forget the tyranny of what happened there. We forget the lie the president told the Blue Dog Democrats who did not want to promote the funding for abortion in the legislation. So he lied and said, well, I'll just fix that with executive order. Don't worry about that. And then we found out, of course, later that that's not the case. But what angers me the most, and what should anger all of you the most, is that when we won this majority in the House, every Tea Party rep in Illinois and all the surrounding states committed to us, we the people, that when I get to Congress, I will stop. I will do whatever it takes to stop Obamacare. That is not what happened. And I'll tell you what happened. 4 months after those Tea Party reps got into Congress, there was a resolution called House Joint Resolution number 48, HJ 48, look it up. Otherwise known as Continuing Resolution number 6 of 7. The vote took place on March 16th, 2011. For 4 to 5 months prior, Steve King and Michelle Bachmann were making it very clear that we control the purse of Congress. We now control, because where do spending bills originate? In the House of Representatives. We control the House of Representatives. So Michelle Bachmann and Steve King said, we want you to stand with us, sign this resolution, and do not allow funding for the government to go forward unless $105 billion in Obamacare auto funding is removed. Only 54 Republicans in the whole country stood with them. Only 2 in Illinois. Only 2. Who wants to guess who the first one was?
Joe Walsh.
Congressman Joe Walsh. The other is Tim Johnson, down south. Every other representative in this state who promised to cut funding for Obamacare did not stand with Michelle Bachmann. None of them. So remember that. But it's even worse. It's not just Obamacare funding. It's the Life Riders that were in HJ 48. The Life Riders allowed hundreds of millions of your tax dollars to go directly to Planned Parenthood. Since August 1st, 2011, the second wave of Obamacare mandates went into place. And on that date, Health and Human Services deemed morning after abortion pills to be considered as preventative care. And now, whether you like it or not, when you buy a health insurance policy anywhere in this country, look in your schedule of benefits and you'll see there are two different kinds of lethal morning after abortion pills, which you are now paying for, and you have no choice. And there is no one to blame for that except for the reps in this state that did not stand with Michelle Bachmann and Steve King. Down. So they figured we're going to reach across the aisle and work with abortion funding and $105 billion Obamacare funding. Let's do that. Let's work together. So please, when you see your representative next, whoever is in your district, even our House Majority Leader, Peter Roskam, ask Mr. Roskam, where did he vote on March 16, 2011? So our job as Tea Party Patriots is to hold them accountable. The only way to punish representatives who do not do what's right is not to reelect them, right? Or at least let them know if they don't shape up, they're out, no matter what position they hold. This is why I wanted to speak to you today, to update you on what took place, because very few people know that that's what took place on March 16, 2011. Which is why I'm beseeching everyone to help Joe, because he's the only one close to us that did the right thing that day. Back to how do we get here? There were three lies that the president used, and he is a bald-faced liar.
Yes.
The greatest liar since the father of the lie. And there were three lies he used to push this legislation through. The very first one was about pre-existing conditions. Do you remember the Democrat Party under Barack Obama saying that every year 45,000 people are dying in the streets because they can't get access to health insurance. And when they're denied health insurance, they're, quote, left with no options. I want to tell you the truth about pre-existing conditions because it's the biggest lie the president used to push this through. And most Americans don't understand HIPAA law. They don't understand that the reason we have pre-existing conditions is because of the federal government. The president has done a beautiful job pinning the problem and the onus on the insurance industry. Who knows HIPAA law or has heard of HIPAA law? When HIPAA law was written in 1996, most of us know it relates to privacy, right? There's a far more important clause in federal HIPAA law, and that clause is portability. And the portability clause states that if you have health insurance with a group health insurance provider, which is usually through your work, and you've had that coverage for 18 months, if you leave that plan and you go to a new plan, and there's no lapse of more than 63 days between your old employer-sponsored group health insurance plan and your new employer-sponsored group health insurance plan, the new employer-sponsored group health insurance plan cannot deny you coverage for any pre-existing conditions. Which is why when you leave the old employer, they send you a what? Certificate of creditable coverage. That is your ticket to tell your new employer that, hey, I got leukemia, I'm 8 months pregnant, I've got 4 medications I'm on, you gotta cover me, because federal HIPAA law says you do. That law protects 90% of the American insured. But there's 10% that are disenfranchised. These are the individual small business owners, the entrepreneurs, the 53% who pay taxes in this country. They are the small business owners, the ones who cannot form together a group because they're independents. So they will go on the individual health insurance market and they will buy a plan. When that happens, if you are overweight, if you are on 2 different medications, if you have a family history of heart disease, if you are a smoker and you have another condition, you can be denied health insurance. Okay? 10% doesn't sound like a big number. That's now grown to 14 million Americans. So it's a real problem. But whose fault is it? It's not the insurance company. When HIPAA law was written in '96, all they had to do was extend portability protection to individual policyholders. In fact, to solve pre-existing conditions, we don't need a 2,400 page, double space, healthcare takeover legislation, 960 pages, single space. We don't need that. We need one sentence added to existing federal HIPAA portability law that states the following: all individual policies are now protected under existing portability law. Done. We no longer have pre-existing conditions in this country. It's over. So if we can do it with one sentence, why do we need a 2,400-page healthcare law? Because they need a lot of pages to take over our healthcare system. It's exactly what they're doing. And the people who are in the gravest position in this country are our senior citizens. The left loves to put out their slick K Street ads of a Paul Ryan look-alike taking a senior citizen in a wheelchair and pushing her over the cliff. Whenever you have one of your friends on the left, of which I have none, but maybe you do, and they tell you that the Republican Party is trying to destroy Medicare, please respond by, you idiots already destroyed Medicare. Now, I want you to remember, if you remember nothing else today, remember this number, please. Because Sean Hannity, Ted Baxter, which is what I call Bill O'Reilly, even Glenn Beck, all of them have the same figures they repeat on Fox News when they're talking about Obamacare, because they're clueless. They're not industry experts. They're great anchors, but they don't know the insides and outs. When you hear that the Democrats cut $500 billion from Medicare, that is the truth. But I want you to remember this number and replace it, the $500 billion. Sorry. That was not my daughter. Replace the $500 billion with $4.95 trillion. Richard Foster, the chief Medicare actuary, did an in-depth study on how much will be cut from Medicare over the first 20 years if Obamacare is fully implemented. He found that not just the initial $500 billion will be cut, but over the first 20 years, $4.95 trillion will be taken from Medicare. $4.95 trillion. This is not a left-wing blogger. This is not a right-wing blogger. This is not somebody with a modem in their mother's basement. This is the chief Medicare actuary. $4.95 trillion. But far more troubling than how much they will cut is how much the reimbursement ratio that the government pays to doctors who take Medicare will be reduced by. And it starts January 1st, 2012, which is less than a month away. Medicare will be cut by nearly 30%. The amount that your doctor will be reimbursed if he takes Medicare will be cut by nearly 30%. Because, everybody ever heard of the doc fix?
Yes.
Every 6 months they would fix the doc fix and kick it down the road. There's no money for that anymore. So there is no doc fix plan for January 1st. So the first wave of Medicare cuts begins January 1st, 2012, and it's a big one, 30%. It's actually 27.89, look it up. That starts. But far more concerning is Richard Foster's findings, and it's not just him, but I'm using Richard Foster because he's the chief Medicare actuary. He states that over the first 20 years, and it begins very sharply in the first 10 years, the reimbursement ratio that the government pays to doctors who take Medicare will be reduced to less than what they pay for Medicaid. How is that concerning? In 2005, there was an independent study done by the American Academy of Cardiology. Look it up. You can find it at my blog, truthaboutobamacare.com. It's linked there. That study revealed that people who have surgery on Medicaid are 50% more likely to die after that surgery than those with private health insurance. Because the reimbursement ratio to doctors who still take Medicaid, the few, the broke, they don't get good care, and they don't get follow-up care. So as soon as the American Academy of Cardiology study came out in 2005, the medical industry was on fire. 50% more likely to die. We can't let that happen. We have to fix that. So what's the government's answer always to fix things? Apply more government. Make it bigger. So you fast forward to 2009, the University of Virginia does a follow-up study. Their findings found that today, if you have surgery and Medicaid, you are now 97% more likely to die after surgery. Line of thought. Sarah Palin was crucified in the media because she dared to use the term death panels, right? When you reduce the Medicare reimbursement ratio to less than that from Medicaid, that the government pays for Medicaid, when you cut $4.95 trillion from Medicare to fund a massive new entitlement for middle-class people to get almost free health insurance, is that not a death panel? Let me take it one step further. There is not a day that goes by that I don't miss or listen to the Mark Levin Show. It should be required listening for all Americans, especially our friends on the left, of which I am none. The other evening, a brain surgeon, neurologist, called into the Mark Levin Show, and he had just gotten back from Washington, D.C., and met with Health and Human Services. And they were instructed that if a patient comes in with an aneurysm or a brain bleed and needs emergency surgery and they're over the age of 70, you must contact us first so we can review it under our ethics panel and prescribe comfort care. Do you understand what that means? That is a death panel. Now, prior to the legislation passage, the healthcare czar, his name was Ezekiel Emanuel, Rahm Emanuel's brother. He believes in a system called the Complete Lives System. If you go to the Wall Street Journal or to my blog, you'll find a link that talks about Ezekiel Emanuel's fervent belief that your amount of medical care that you should receive is based on your age and your relative value to the collective. So in the Wall Street Journal, he has his complete life system in a graph for you all to see. At zero, you have what? No value to society, right? Which is why the left doesn't value the life of the unborn child. As you start climbing up and get to the age of 18 or 20, when you can actually start earning a salary, your value shoots up really high. This is the point where you should get a lot of medical care to keep you earning to help the collective. As you start going down the graph, you'll see this. This is Ezekiel Emanuel. This is Obama's #1 healthcare czar and chief advisor. 40, 44, which is where I'm at. I'm slowly losing value. 50, 55, 60. By the time you get around 65, your value to society, according to Dr. Ezekiel Emanuel, is almost nothing. So this is why the neurologists were called to the White House to meet with HHS to determine whether or not somebody with a brain bleed at 2 in the morning is eligible to have surgery. Because they don't want to waste the money. Because they have 24 million new people, they have to get shiny new health insurance plans. That is the first lie, pre-existing conditions. The second, President Barack Obama said to the American people during the State of the Union speech that a man from Downers Grove, Illinois, had his health insurance canceled, his treatment delayed, and he died because of it. Who remembers that direct quote? Mm-hmm. That man's name was Otto Raddatz. The only truth in that statement was that he had passed away, because he did die from cancer. But he said his coverage was canceled, his treatment was delayed. In reality, he bought an individual health insurance plan, and he had a condition that existed prior to the purchase of that health insurance plan. He did not disclose it on the application. Soon after he bought the plan, he started filing claims for cancer. So the insurance company, bing, red flag. Why are you filing claims? Let's do what's called a pre-existing condition review. Which again, they wouldn't be allowed to do that if the incompetent boobs in 1996 had extended portability to all Americans so that we don't have to worry about pre-existing conditions between one policy and the next. But they didn't. So now, they were going to do a pre-ex review. So they sent him a letter said, we may rescind your coverage if we find out you didn't tell the truth on the application, because that's insurance fraud. So, as it turns out, after the review was done, they had every legal right to rescind that coverage. When they rescind the coverage, they give you back all your premiums, less any claims paid out. So they sent him a letter. First thing he did, and his sister did, was contact the Department of Insurance. And then they contacted the Attorney General. And then they contacted Assurant Health Insurance Company in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And they asked them, even though it is your legal right to terminate his coverage, he needs a bone marrow transplant. It's going to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Please keep his coverage in force. You know what happened? They kept his coverage in force. They paid all his claims for 4 more years until he died. But the president said his coverage was canceled, his treatment was delayed, and he died because of it. Second biggest lie. And thank God for an intrepid reporter at the Chicago Sun-Times who figured it all out. Because she went back in the congressional record shortly before Obama gave this lying speech from the State of the Union and saw the congressional testimony of his sister, who was actually telling the truth. So there is no way that Barack Obama did not know the truth, because the testimony was given in Congress shortly before he stood up there and gave that speech. Now, prior to Obamacare's passage, you were never in a situation in this country, in any state, where you were denied health insurance and you didn't have another option. It's never happened. We didn't need Obamacare to fix pre-existing conditions, because when the government dropped the ball, the states exercised their sovereignty and opened what is called high-risk health insurance pools. Prior to the passage of Obamacare, they existed in 35 states. In 10 other states, they were called individual guaranteed issue mandates. And I will give you an example. The state of Ohio has 20 carriers. If you want to sell health insurance in the state of Ohio, you must give 4% of your block of business, you must issue 4% of your block of business every year on a guaranteed issue basis, once a year, open enrollment for anybody, no matter how sick they are. No questions asked. Individuals. So if you're sick and you have leukemia, you have a 30-day window, you call United Healthcare in Ohio, they got to take you, no questions asked. And they got to do that for 4%. Once they max out their 4%, they have to report to the State Department of Insurance. When they do, they will give you the number of the nearest competitor, which would be Humana. Humana must then take 4%. Never in Ohio's history have those 20 carriers maxed out their 4%. Not even close. What a brilliant idea. Why couldn't we take that as an idea and spread that across the country? You know what we did? We took the worst idea in Massachusetts under Mitten's Rhino Omni, and we spread that crap all over the country. That's what we did. The state of Massachusetts has the highest health insurance premiums in the country by far. It is so bad in Massachusetts that the wait to see a doctor is 47 days. Imagine a rash in 47 days. And they have more doctors per capita than any other state in the union. The hospitals are starting their own HMOs because the healthcare system is that bad. And Mittens loves to go on the air and say to people, the president just asked me. I could tell him what was wrong with it. Why didn't he just call me? In reality, Mittens' advisors were in the White House crafting Obamacare with the President of the United States. So if you see Mittens lying to the American people, please let people know that he has never been a conservative, that he screwed us all on Obamacare, and he'll do it again if he gets anywhere near the Oval Office. Number 4, how are we going to pay to ensure, before I get there, let me give you the third line. If you like your plan, you can keep your plan. Remember that? No one's going to take it away from you. He went a step further. That's a quote. Send health insurance companies that have closed their doors or stopped offering health insurance anymore. Why? Because of what's called the medical loss ratios. The Obama minions thought it would be intelligent to force insurance companies to operate on a much smaller margin. Not their profit margin, their operating margin. So if you underwrite 50 or more people on health insurance, 50 or more people on a group, your operating margin must immediately, as of January 1st, 2011, be lowered to 15%. Understand that most health insurance companies were operating at a 25, 75, 30, 70. It was an operating margin where they could still have their overhead, they could still pay their claims, they could still have the necessary reserves, which the states demand they have in order to operate in that state, in order to pay their shareholders, in order to pay those who have their companies in their portfolios, the salaries for their employees, everything it takes for an insurance company to survive. Cut in half, January 1st, 2011. As soon as that happened, insurance companies across the country that were smaller, not the big ones, not Aetna, whose CEO was sitting in the White House conversing with Obama about how great Obamacare is going to be. Not United Healthcare, who had a mobile imaging and healthcare facility in their truck. It was like a big, what do you call it, semi, sitting out in front of the Capitol building promoting Obamacare. Not them. But the smaller companies, the ones who have the better prices, all of them started considering, can we survive on a 15% margin or a 20% margin if we underwrite less than 50? I don't think we can. So what happened? They started sending out letters like this one to my clients who had coverage with Guaranteed Trust Life Insurance Company. This woman and her family I met with in Naperville almost 12 years ago. And at the time I was discussing with them the brilliance of Senator Archer's plan called the Archer MSA. He's a man who was the grandfather of HSAs, health savings accounts. They had a low deductible, a low copay. They were paying through the nose for their health insurance. And I did what John Mackey did, the CEO of Whole Foods. John Mackey's premiums were going up so high he could barely afford them. And so he said, I'm going to take away the copay, I'm going to take away the traditional health insurance plan, and I'm going to give every family one deductible that they share and chip away at, okay? When he did that with an HSA qualified plan, the premiums for John Mackey's Whole Foods Corporation were cut in half. In half. So what did he do? He took that half and he opened up what's called medical IRAs for every one of his employees, whether they pack fish, they work the counter, or they're on the board. All of them. And so what happened very shortly, immediately what happened is his employees protested out in front of his Whole Foods markets because they didn't have their $10 copay anymore. How will we survive without our $10 copay? We can't survive. Understand, no changes were made in their major medical. They still had $5 million lifetime. They still had preventative care. They just didn't have the copay. Protested, said he was horrible, blah, blah, blah. ABC News, John Stossel, when he was still on ABC, had him on, showed the protests on video. Fast forward 4 years. John Stossel gets his own show on the Fox Business Network, invites Mr. Mackey back. In the audience are only his employees. He shows a video of them protesting outside of his facilities. And he says, now it's 4 years later, what do you think of your CEO today? Round of applause, standing ovation. Love him. Why? Because all that money he was paying to his health insurance carrier for the privilege of a $10 copay plan, the other half he stuck into their medical IRA accounts or their health savings accounts. And they were able to stand up in the audience and say, well, I have $12,000 in my HSA. I pack fish for $7 an hour, but I have $12,000 in my HSA. I have $8,000. I have $15,000. That's all money that was going to the insurance company. And now what his employers are doing is when they need health care of any kind, they call the doctor and say, hey, I need a CBC, complete blood count. I need a physical. I need radiokeratotomy to fix my eyes. What do you charge? And the doctors go, I have no idea what we charge. Don't you have health insurance? Yes, I do. And I have what's called a health savings account. And whatever I don't spend is mine to keep. So you better give me your price or I'm calling somebody else. right? So they started having a part in the cost of their health care. Imagine if you had health insurance for food and you had a copay for your steaks. Wouldn't you stock up on filet mignon? Who cares? It's only a $10 copay. So it was a brilliant concept. When I met with this woman in Naperville, that's what I taught them. And they moved from a traditional health insurance plan to an HSA qualified plan. And all that money they saved, which is about $200 a month at the time, $2,400 a year, they faithfully put inside their HSA account every year. And they were healthy for 10 of those 12 years, until she got breast cancer. Now, when she got breast cancer, they had thousands and thousands of dollars in their HSA account. And they only had to worry about a $5,000 deductible, 100% coverage afterward. So every year she could easily manage her health care costs, her chemotherapy, her radiation therapy, her scans, everything else, because she knew she had controlled her costs with a $5,000 deductible only. And she had money in her tax deductible medical IRA. Then came Obamacare. And her insurance company sent the following letter. And when I tell you her name. Why would I tell you her name? Because it's protected by what law written in 96? Thank you. Dear blank, the purpose of this letter is to provide you with important information regarding your major medical coverage with Guaranty Trust Life Insurance Company of Glenview, Illinois. The letter is intended to provide notice of an action Guaranty Trust will be taking that will result in the termination of all major medical plans in your state. Will I be offered a replacement plan? Yes, we are required by law in the terms of your policy to offer you replacement coverage. But wait a minute, the president said he'd drop your coverage anytime you want. That's a lie. They're required by law to offer an alternative. Always have been, always will be. The replacement plan will be a high deductible major medical plan. A high deductible major medical plan is a type of plan that doesn't begin to pay for covered charges until such charges exceed your new deductible of $25,000 per person. That happened only because of Obamacare. Did she have $25,000 per person in her HSA account? No, but she did everything right. Now she gets cancer. So I had to take her off of this plan, put her on the state high-risk health insurance pool, which at the time only covered $2 million. She had an $8 million plan. So she had to worry about running out of benefits for the rest of her cancer treatment, directly because of Obamacare. So you cannot keep your plan. 20 carriers, 13 in Iowa alone, have stopped selling health insurance because of the medical loss ratios. And people have lost their plans, adding to the uninsured pool, which, by the way, has never been 50 million people. Never. When you take away the people making $75,000 a year who refuse to act responsibly and buy health insurance, when you take away the people making $50,000 a year who refuse to buy health insurance, when you take away the 8 to 12 million illegals who are on our taxpayer dollar, the actual amount, and by the way, half of the 50 million that the Democrats always use, half of them are uninsured for 4 months or less. That is not a chronic situation. So the chronically uninsured in this country, the real number is 8 million. Do you think it is possible that we can insure 8 million Americans for less than $2.5 trillion? Every year, according to Time magazine, in 2010, we waste in our healthcare system $780 billion. If you just took half of that waste, you could buy every one of the uninsured in this country, even the supposed 50 million, a gold-plated healthcare plan that would make the CEOs of Blue Cross Blue Shield green with envy. So if it's not about that, and it's not about pre-existing conditions, it's not about the insured, it's about control. Now, remember, right before the law passed, the president and Edith Dingbat Pelosi decided we're going to have a brilliant idea. We got to pay for this thing somehow, right? And if you're going to be irresponsible, as Mitt Romney says, you're not going to buy health insurance, we're going to penalize you. In fact, we're not just going to penalize you, we're going to put you where if you don't buy health insurance? In jail. And the Tea Party said, not on our watch, you're not. They were going to apply the same penalties if you don't pay your taxes to you not buying health insurance, which if you ever read the IRS code, they can apply levies, the levies could go up after 4 or 5 years, you can actually go to jail. So they're going to do the same thing. So they took it out, right? So we won, which presented a unique problem to the president and his administration. Because now, if we can't put you in jail, how are we going to force you to buy a government-approved health insurance plan? How are we going to do it? I know. We'll put a fine in place, but I can't call it a tax because I'm running for re-election. I'm going to call it a fine. But then George Snuffleupagus has me on ABC News and asks me, you said it's not a tax, it's a fine. But Mr. President, the dictionary says that this is what a tax is, and what you're doing is a tax. I reject that definition. That was the president's answer. Why did he reject the definition? Because 28 states are suing him for stepping on the Constitution. He can't use the word tax, but now he's using it because he has to defend it, and he's trying to do it under the Commerce Clause. There is nothing in the Commerce Clause that allows the government to force you to buy a private product from somebody else. They can levy taxes, and they cannot regulate inactivity. And that's what it is. If you don't buy health insurance, it's inactivity. And it has nothing to do with car insurance. Car insurance protects the other person, not you. All of these are lies. Down to the nitty-gritty. How are we going to pay for it? And why is health insurance so expensive? I will close with that. We hear from our friends on the left that the cost of medical care is so high, it keeps going up, and that's why these evil health insurance companies are charging us so much money, because it's so expensive. I'm going to tell you the real reason why health insurance is so darn expensive. In 1979, there were 279 mandates placed on every health insurance policy in this country. 279. Would anyone like to guess how many we have now post-Obamacare? 2,100. Things like infertility, Joe Biden's hair plugs, healthcare membership. All of these things are mandated. And you hear 2,100, and it's kind of difficult to kind of see that. So Glenn Beck is kind of a visual person. So am I. So I brought the mandates with me. Ready? Here they are. That's 2,100 mandates placed on every health insurance policy in this country. And you wonder why the cost of health insurance is so high. There's a YouTube video of a woman in California who's a small business owner. And in the video, she's lamenting how her premiums keep going up. There's 300 health insurance companies. How come I only have 6 to choose from in California? Because California is a land of fruit and nuts. And the insurance companies don't want to sell there because sexual reassignment surgery is a mandated benefit. So they left the state. In Colorado, the brilliant liberal legislators, once they took control, said, this just happened August 1st, 2011. They said, I think it would be fair if every health insurance company covers maternity from day one, no waiting period. So let's pass it August 1st. They pass a law. You know what happened the next day? All the insurance companies left, leaving only 4. Because they know that they can go to 56 other states if you're Barack Obama, or 49 other if you're a normal American, and sell health insurance without all these mandates, right? So every time the government gets involved, they drive up the cost of health insurance. In Illinois, we're paying a fortune for health insurance. Why? Because we all have to pay for infertility. All of us. Which is one of the most expensive medical procedures known to mankind. But we all have to pay for it. Even if below the navel you don't even have the proper plumbing to have a baby. You still got to pay for it. There's another reason why our health insurance is so expensive in Illinois. We always look to Massachusetts as the template from where Obamacare came from. We have our own template here. And the guy who designed it is going to prison for 14 years. His name is Blago. Blago, in his big, dumb, liberal heart, decided that he's going to expand Medicaid to cover not just children of the poor, which is where S-CHIP was designed to do, the federal S-CHIP bill, right? And every time the liberals expand our entitlement programs, it disenfranchises those who it was intended for. Children of the poor, we can all support that. What I cannot support is what Blago did by adding moms and babies. Moms and babies is still in force. If you're 8 months pregnant, guess what? If you don't have any income, you can go to the state, and you and I, and you and I, and you and I will pay for that baby. If you have another one, we'll do it again. And guess what? If the father of the baby lives with baby mama and provide a utility bill showing that he does, he gets free health insurance too. But that ain't the half of it. Thanks to the Chicago Tribune, who had the guts to do a survey to find out how many people on our All Kids program were here illegally. Would anyone like to guess the percentage?
60.
75%.
Oh.
75%. Do you remember when Joe Wilson called the president a liar? And it was so shocking to him that his left arm went limp. Strangely, he left the left one. Because he said, well, they are going to cover illegals, right? See, they're not going to cover illegals, and the legislation specifically prohibits it. He'll just make them legal first, right? Then they're on our tax dollar. Lastly, how will we pay for this? Oh, by the way, speaking of big government, ready? That's about 4 feet tall. I can't get it to unravel, but this is how many regulations it took FDR. Can you spread that out for me, Carol? There you go. It's too tightly wound. That's how many regulations it took for FDR to fundamentally transform the United States of America and bankrupt the nation, leaving with $63 trillion in current unfunded liabilities between Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. That many agencies, right? Just in Obamacare. Just in Obamacare. The president has designed 159 new boards, agencies, and grants facilities. Ready? Here they are. Think we might lose a little bit more liberty than we lost under FDR? And that's just in the healthcare law. And by the way, each one of these needs its own sub-boards, agencies, and grants and groups. And they're all being implemented now. One of the worst is the Independent Payment Advisory Board, IPAD, which consists of unelected bureaucrats who are making decisions on how to cut Medicare. Unelected, I mentioned, not elected. And they're already being chosen and put in place as we speak. Lastly, how in God's name will we pay for it? By taxing those of us who actually pay taxes. I love it when the president's own people end up damning him by putting out facts. Healthcare law to sock middle class with a $3.9 billion tax increase due to Obamacare. Remember the other lie that nobody's taxes making less than $200,000 a year will be increased? Remember that? Taxpayers earning less. This is, by the way, from the Joint Committee on Taxation, which is Congress's official scorekeeper. Not a left-wing blogger, not a right-wing blogger. The Joint Committee on Taxation. Taxpayers earning less than $200,000 a year will pay roughly $3.9 billion more in taxes in 2019 alone due to the health care reform law. The new law raises $15.2 billion over 10 years by limiting the medical expense deduction, a provision widely used by taxpayers who either have a serious illness or are older. Taxpayers can currently deduct medical expenses in excess of 7.5% of their AGI. Starting in 2013, most taxpayers, the vast majority under $200,000, will be able to deduct expenses greater than 10% of AGI. Older taxpayers are hit by the threshold increasing in 2017. Once the law is fully implemented, the Joint Committee on Taxation estimates the deduction limitation will affect 14.8 million taxpayers, 14.7 million of them making less than $200,000 a year. The president lied again. But what if you're not working? What if you are retired? Oh, they're going to get you too. Here's how they're going to do it. You will not find this anywhere on the internet other than my blog because it was scrubbed shortly after it came out. Lloyd's of London decided to investigate after Nostradamus himself Henry Waxman, decided to call all of the local companies, especially the ones in Iowa like Caterpillar and, you remember this? Caterpillar and the other ones? Come into DC and prove to us how you're taking hundreds of millions of dollars in losses because of Obamacare. That is, right, remember? So they sent the emails and the numbers, and Nostradamus canceled the event because the numbers were right. So Lloyd's of London said, well, wait a minute, this is Caterpillar, this is Pepsi, there's something's going on here. Let's interview them and find out how much they lost. 80 companies. 80 companies. Starting in 2013, companies that provide prescription drug benefit for retirees under Medicare can no longer deduct this subsidy from their taxes due to the federal health care overhaul signed into law on March 23rd. Of these companies, Walgreens, now this starts in 2013, remember, January 1st, 2013. And just think to yourself, I'm retired, but I have a retirement portfolio. As I mentioned these companies, think if you have them in your hopefully balanced portfolio. Walgreens, $44 million loss, January 1st, 2013. Pfizer, $270 million loss, starting January 1st, 2013. Ecolab, $5 million. Caterpillar, $90 million. Merck & Company, $147 million. Pepsi, $40 million. Boeing, $150 million. MetLife, $75 million. United States Steel, $27 million. AT&T, $1 billion. Verizon, $970 million. AK Steel, $31 million. John Deere, $129.5 million. Ingersoll Rand, $41 million. Lockheed Martin, $96 million. And the list goes on. Big numbers, huh? Now in your head, multiply it by 4 because those are first quarter losses only. Now, do you think they might lay some people off? Or raise the prices on the products and services that they offer? That is hope and change. Or like I call it, hoax and chains. So they're going to hit you whether you're working or you're retired. Last thing, and then I will close and be done finally, because there's so much tyranny to cover. I brought with me empirical evidence that proves that health insurance premiums have not gone down. I've been in the business for 16 years, health insurance particularly, Medicare over 65, everybody else under 65. And the historical rate increases for health insurance premiums for my clients on bad years were 8 to 10%. Then the first wave of Obamacare mandates hit. Because remember they said, free preventative care for everybody. It's free. Yes, it's free if you're not paying the premium. If you're paying the premium, here's the love letter the Blue Cross will send to you. Your annual renewal statement is now going up 44.78%. So what happens when the employer gets a 44.78% increase for the first time in their entire time of buying health insurance from Blue Cross? First thing they do is call me and blame me, which is why I call myself an evil health insurance broker. But then, oh, by the way, it's not isolated. 35.63%, 30.17%. So what happens? They dump their employees because they can't afford those premiums anymore, which is exactly what's happening in Massachusetts. They dump them off their plan and put them on the new connector, which is an Obamacare, it's a Romneycare exchange, where the employer is heavily subsidized to kick you off and put you on the government-run health insurance plan, which is what those exchanges will be. And there's no choices as far as, I'm going to lower my premiums by staying outside of the exchanges. It's going to be very, very tax subsidized and tax favored to buy health insurance in those exchanges. So they're going to put guys like me out of business, which they're rapidly doing, by the way, already. They've already cut our commissions in half. That happened on 923 as well. They want to replace us with bureaucrats. That should be fun. So, premiums are going up. You cannot keep your plan. Seniors are in serious peril, and you taxpayers are all going to pay for it. So what can you do? I told you in the beginning what you can do. Find out where your congressperson voted on March 16th. And then, as my friend Joe Walsh likes to say, get that boot out, right? And make them pay. Because it's their fault. We could have stopped all of this, especially in the blue states, But our reps did not stand with Michelle Bachmann and Steve King and do the right thing. They bought into the working together with our Democrat allies crap. And that's why we are where we are now. Thank you very much.